I hate lamps. I'll say it right away. I hate them.
And when there are 10 of them inside?
I know a story. There was one person who said, I strip copper from Soviet bombers, another from submarines. How much money did it cost?
It was about 1,000,000 rubles.
And we have a game here, Cossacks and Robbers or Hide and Seek, in the room of Presto and Nikolay in the room. Anatoly Alexandrovich Kabanov, the legends we have already made videos about, be sure to watch. And today we are again in this super cool room that Nikolay has improved. Please tell us, what are your ideas about this thing you installed? Anatoly Alexandrovich said that when he installed them, his life indeed changed for the better because the sound is completely different. In general, tell us how much money you spent on this room, how much Anatoly Alexandrovich paid you, what you did here, and what your ideas are. Let's go.
But specifically about these resonators that you see here, I wanted to do this for your channel. The people who are watching, they understand everything. I know you understand everything. You all know how it works. Everyone there knows how to assemble it better. Decided to do this specifically for you. Something a bit strange. In fact, it's a fairly simple thing. This is a resonator. It is designed based on the principle of a Helmholtz resonator. But in fact, it cannot be excited like that because it operates at a lower frequency. And still, unlike the Helmholtz resonator, this is a quarter wave resonator. It has several harmonics, several frequencies, unlike Helmholtz, which it can effectively absorb. So what does it do? Just say it simply. Yes, it absorbs echo at lower frequencies in this case. Plus, due to its external structure, it represents a semicircular diffuser.
So I take such things and put them in my apartment and...
Yes, and you get a denser low. Denser low. Plus diffusion. The image gets a bit closer. Your stereo image starts moving towards you. Rather than being somewhere far away and somewhat blurry, unclear.
But I think the guests will be a bit shocked when they see such a structure standing in the middle of the room.
Close ones are always in shock, probably.
How much does it cost?
If those who close probably do not support, they will be in shock. Probably, if close ones support, they probably will not be in shock.
There are 4 pieces here.
It's not exactly expensive, actually. It's an affordable item. It can be made for 25 to 40,000 rubles, depending, of course, on the length, because it depends on the material used and your space.
It's wood, right?
No, it's enforced plastic.
Is something inside?
Yes, of course, of course. Inside, there is a special element, like what I already told you, which uses activated carbon as an absorbing element.
It won't spill.
The most absorbing remit will pour out.
I think it will fall and there will be immediate activation. It won't spill if it can be tied in case of an upset stomach, in case of anything, yes.
Yes, in general, there are all sorts of interesting things. Actually, I wanted to tell a bit more about how I ended up here.
Yes, tell me.
To get to know Anatoly Alexandrovich. Perhaps he has already told you in the interview that, yes, of course, he is a music lover and has been engaged in it all his life. And when I met him, I saw how passionate he is about it and how much he enjoys it. And then I saw this. This is a big name in the world of studios and a significant part of our progress as humanity in terms of music and sound engineering. But when I saw this right here in this very empty room, it kind of really shocked me a lot. Because,
well, he had bass traps set up, right?
Yes, he had some panels that were fixed in the corners and thin ones for the primary reflections. You know, everyone goes to the Leroy Merlin store, buys mineral wool, fabric, and so on. It works quite well for primary reflections. But this is a very high range. Today, guys, 600, 800 hertz is the best you can hope for. What surprised me more here was the perforated drywall. This material is quite aggressive for sound because the upper mid-range of drywall is generally very harsh. We have horn speakers set up here in this room. It creates a super harsh resonance from the wall, super harsh horns. It's like a case of redundant expression. Listening was quite difficult in terms of distortions. Plus, the ceiling was completely empty, and it had such a resonance, not the most pleasant. And when we started discussing what could be done, I was told that nothing could be done on the horizon. If you want, we can come up with something for the ceiling.
And you hung these panels?
Yes, but the panels here are actually not small at all. 8 large absorbers are hung here. Each of them is almost the size of a refrigerator. Each such absorber costs around 40,000 rubles.
40 times 8.
Yes, this is not the most expensive technology. It was necessary to increase the sound absorption coefficient because, I remind you, Westlake are studio monitors. They are used in studios. Studio sound is the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, all different generations of studio sound, different standards, different engineers, different innovations on how to make a studio space work and play. And, well, the engineers did not design these speakers to stand in an empty room. Well, let's be honest. So all I could do was relate the coefficients, relate the pressure of these speakers that they bring into this room, and decide what I could do to at least move it all closer to the listener so that it became. And you suggested these absorbers, and accordingly, what are they called? Diffraction grids, acoustic lenses, if anyone is interested. One piece costs 6,000 rubles, which is quite reasonable. There are a total of 18 of them here, as far as I remember. There are 18 here.
It's fine, it's already performing decently for us.
Yes, still, you cannot do the following. You cannot use only absorption. That would be a big mistake, because the room will become a bit like this again. It will be distorted in terms of amplitude frequency characteristics, so I needed to bring reflections back into the room. That's a fact. Reflections needed to be brought back. Besides that, everything you can see on the horizon are these black absorbers. This is a top-notch item made by KB Cub. This thing weighs 120 kilograms. It's heavy, it's substantial, and it does its job perfectly. It is located behind the speaker, to the right of the speaker, and to the left of the speaker. And 4 pieces here. Yes, roughly speaking, we have a total of 6 planes. So one is behind the speaker. Those are these 2 planes. Another is beside the speaker. Those are these 2 planes. And as you can see, we have one absorber above, over the speaker, which is tuned specifically to this length, this distance.
Inside, we have activated carbon weighing 120 kilograms.
Yes, activated carbon as an absorbing element. There is no mineral wool here. This is a completely different technology. We spent more than 2 years just on the design and testing of these things. So, this is a lot of time and money.
I see. So they have legs to make it easier to move.
Yes, of course, they have legs. You can roll them out at any moment for your convenience. After all, it's a heavy item.
It wasn't designed as something you just set down lightly with a friend. It's quite heavy, and God forbid something like that falls. Well, it's true, I think it has its place. Unfortunately, I don't remember the feelings when it was perfect, but overall, the stage is fine. Everything is normal, except that I noticed when we listened to the control track, friends always need to enhance their listening skills. So, if you want to train your hearing, take your control tracks, listen to them on different systems, and then you will have a rough understanding. I asked to play Rammstein's Lose and noticed that something was off in this system because the vocalist was really shifted to the 11 o'clock position when we listened to the disc, when we played the vinyl. Anatoly Alexandrovich, to be honest, I'm not a fan of vinyl, and once again I was convinced that it sounds worse to me than the disc. For some reason, the vocalist shifted to the 10 o'clock position instead of 12 o'clock, and you heard that, right?
Yes, I heard that too. In general, reference tracks in your approach are the right practice, meaning when you know the material, you've heard it in many different spaces. That's probably the most reliable approach. It's just that when we heard it, I immediately said that I usually set up a microphone with different methodologies using software. But listening is also important, and it's always right to do it as an expert who is a professional and connected to studios. What do you think? We haven't figured out yet why the vocalist went off to the left. I think there could be a big list of checkpoints here, considering the number of wires and the tube crossover. So, when we deal with tubes, it's usually...
I hate lamps, friends. I'll say it right away. I hate them.
Well, when there are 10 of them inside, there are 10, and one of them could have gone somewhere. It can move a little bit, and it actually frustrates me too when there are many components in the systems that can fail. It's certainly a challenge to set everything up and get it all back, but it can be done. So we just need to slowly unravel this puzzle, figuring out where it came from and where it's going. When you, for example, ask to play a vinyl record that you don't really like, well, for instance, we already found out 100% that it's not an issue with the source. So that's like the first part of the puzzle solved. It's not the source, so we need to figure it out further. And secondly, probably the wires. Everyone will start checking and doing something. Well, it's a gradual process. It's routine.
By the way, what do you think of these wires? I honestly don't trust these so-called masters who get secret copper from somewhere. I know a story where one person said he takes copper from Soviet bomber planes, another from submarines, and they make their own supercomponents in secret home laboratories. What's your opinion?
Do you know this person? Yes, I know this person and use his power cables. I don't use such signal wires in my system, but I know this system and these components quite well. When I heard the upgrade of this system with these wires, I was very surprised, considering that one can always have different attitudes towards various manufacturers, whether it's mass production, small-scale production, or multi-series production. However, sometimes people seek results, and if we pay attention to how our audio world has developed, and, for example, my studio, where I exist as a conditional unit, in studios it has always been normal practice since the Motown era to resolder everything visible, because people always came to the studio for the sound. For a specific sound, for a specific microphone, for a specific layout, in which I believe half of everything is resoldered because that's how it sounds. People were pulling something. Therefore, I, for example, have no prejudice towards products that are small scale. For example, some production, probably the one you are talking about. You speak so reluctantly about the fact that, well, I don't know, maybe it's still some kind of tale, like the one about wires from an airplane, for example, that you mentioned. At that moment, I was less skeptical, because I had seen some things in acoustics that people do, and sometimes I had a lot of skepticism. That is, when I saw some device, I thought it couldn't work. But sometimes there were cases, not always, a lot of voodoo, some kind of unclear little thing, but I encountered a strange thing in my practice and it worked. And it worked great. I believe these wires are of very high quality. Well, personally for me, this is my characteristic. For me, these are very high quality wires, and I would gladly use them in some installations in the future that I will be doing. I really like them. Power cables, I think, are some of the coolest I've had, because there is definitely more equipment in the studio than here. Probably for people who watch the videos, this is a lot of equipment. For me, this is not even one rack unit. It's just something there for now. To choose a microphone, to choose a preamp, not too much. So, yes.
I partly agree with you, Nikolay, because indeed small-scale wires, any production, food, and so on have their place, in my opinion, because people can really create something very high quality. But unfortunately, as production experience shows, it is very difficult to maintain quality control. And to make the next cable the same, or better, or worse, well, except for that man or that woman, whoever is the designer, no one will determine. When large companies take on the task, they have quality control, they have certain standards, they have access to spare parts, because again, people say that assembling an iPhone costs one price, but it is 3 times more expensive. Similarly, if we take an amplifier, for example, and disassemble it into parts, we need to understand that companies, first of all, buy things in large batches. They have access to components at much lower prices. Accordingly, yes, there are their own markups for development for basic expenses, but in general, if we start assembling either this amplifier or the same cable from some special material, we will spend a lot of time, we will spend a lot of money, because in retail, these parts will be significantly more expensive than what the company buys. If an automotive company buys Garrett turbines, they buy them at one price. If we now look for this turbine in retail, even with discounts, the price will be different. The same goes for components, chips, capacitors, transformers. This is done as a special order. Therefore, I don't quite trust such tinkers because there is no quality control. This is again like with food. My mom cooks scrambled eggs, but she always makes them tasty, just in different ways. If I go to a Michelin restaurant and they bring me this dish, it always has roughly the same taste. I understand what you're talking about. At Moulmein, I've been eating tom yum soup for 3 years, and it has the same taste. Nothing changes. This is a sign of mastery. Although the establishment isn't super fancy, they have good dishes. That's why I think it's very, very hard to trust such things. You really need to know the person to understand what they are doing and how. Because again, commercial aspect does exist, and well, I don't trust such things. As for large companies, they are making money from this, but they also have significant competition because they know that if they cut corners, some other Nordost will start producing better quality cables, and they have this constant struggle, Wire World, AudioQuest, and so on.
Yes, there are a lot of brands, I agree. I would probably add that if there are occasions when you have access to the master and you personally know him and his product, then it might be worth getting that product, because there have often been talented engineers in the world who brought some mind-blowing ideas. They created crazy products, but they didn't grow like the companies you describe, which move on to wholesale purchases. And unfortunately, the product moved away from the people. So the main thing is not to miss the moment that there is an engineer next to you who has a good product. And if you support him, maybe he will be the one who will remake. Who will develop. So you might be the one to support this engineer. This is very important too.
I agree, but where does this engineer get copper, for example?
I don't know, to be honest.
Where does he have access from?
I don't know the history of these wires. I don't have insider information here. Maybe. I can arrange for you to interview him.
Yes, this is very interesting because there are super companies, for example, AudioQuest, Siltech, I don't know, Wire World.
There are top brands that have been doing this for a long time.
I know, Wire World, for example, they have a factory in Taiwan, one of the largest cable factories in the world, which makes monocrystalline silver cables, drawing it out. So doing this under our conditions is just unrealistic.
Well, it's like space technologies, closer to NASA, to Cosmos.
Well, how will we make a cable, even if we gather and decide? Let's do something cool now, but where will we get monocrystals of silver conductors?
We won't be able to do it clearly with Dion.
We won't be able to need to buy from resellers, meaning if we buy from resellers, the price will
rise, meaning we as businessmen will be in a strange position.
We won't be able to compete with Wire World, which has crazy volumes, crazy purchases. Since I was involved in production at one time, I understand this entire cycle. You also produce both panels and these sound-absorbing materials. We won't be able to compete with large companies. Therefore, I'm interested in how these people, again, with the cables, meaning it goes to both the left and right speaker, everything has to be just perfect. Here, a centimeter longer in theory will have a little effect, right?
Of course, everything has an effect. It's probably necessary to clarify one point for the viewer, that all the variables mentioned by Radian are also related to big brands. That is indeed, in fact, when we have an occasion to check someone, we can always find very significant mistakes, even among the largest companies. And these mistakes happen sometimes. Revisions of the boards change, and revisions of some parts. There are a lot of these, and it occurs with big brands as well.
Yes, undoubtedly.
This is also the case with their products. Therefore, trust but verify is probably the best approach.
I just trust more. How do you feel about vinyl projects? What do you think about this device with a belt drive? Which do you think is better, belt drive or direct?
As I mentioned in our previous conversation, indeed, vinyl is for those people who, besides having money, also have time. Time is a delicate system. I believe it is like a violin, a very instrumental thing. It is, if we have this body here, then here is our bow. It is essentially all a very large organism with many nodes. Specifically about this turntable, based on my previous interview, I can only say what I have already mentioned, that when I listened to something there, direct drive felt closer to my studio preferences, as it reproduced more evenly, more machine-like than the belt drive. But this is for me. Personally, these are some of my biases. Regarding this specific device of Anatoly Alexandrovich, I can only say that I am afraid to approach it. I can't do anything. Because it is very scary to breathe next to it, scary to adjust it, and scary to put records on it. But this thing can sing, truly sing. You must understand this. With a CD or a file on a flash drive, you won't achieve this. This thing can sing like something fantastic, but you need an incredibly long time for that. Anatoly Alexandrovich has it.
I agree. I can say from experience that, in my opinion, the belt drive is definitely better, and the fact that it is used by the most expensive vinyl manufacturers is, in a way, an indicator. Direct drive is simpler on one hand, but as I have talked to knowledgeable people, I think I even have a video on the channel about the constructor. Belt drive is much less noisy and much easier to adjust the speed, which is very important because when the needle moves across the record from the outer side to the inner, there are a lot of nuances. In general, direct drive does not handle this well. It also seems to me that it is, well, less technological. Although the Japanese are quite meticulous in some entry-level and even mid-range turntables, they use direct drive. Well, okay.
There is a cool thing here that there is also a CD, 2 sources.
Yes, and you can compare.
Yes. See OPA and CEC here. A powerful transport, of course. To be honest, I will say, again, my opinion that is here. Well, of course, have 2 opinions here, friends. Probably here yours and mine, we are it seems to me that we are even calmly, absolutely. You see, 2 audio enthusiasts react calmly to each other's opinion. Yes, why not, for example, about the CD source. I definitely prefer Siki. It seems to me that it is one of the best CD drives overall. Because, well, I have listened to a certain number of them, definitely dozens. S&C, I think, TL1, as far as I remember, is the gold model. It is one of the most memorable ones for me. So, OPA is definitely a cool thing. It's one OPA.
The question here is not about OPA. OPA is a great CD player within a budget of up to 200,000. I personally have an OPA 205 at home. I also had a 105 at one time. I compared them as transports. They are decent as CD players, slightly lower quality, but if we compare them to more professional, let's say, top-tier CD transports, then of course they don't compare. However, in my opinion, in terms of image, the 205 is still one of the best, definitely showing better than any Dune. And I find it even more interesting than Cody Player on many such top builds. Because, well, Oppo 205 is really powerful, and in terms of sound, it is definitely top-notch. Could you please tell me what these springs are doing here? You know what they are?
Most likely, I think these are some kind of vibration isolators. I haven't seen them. It's something homemade. Until you showed them, let's look at them together. Because we can all see these. But I see these for the first time.
I just love to pay attention to all the details. To the little things, details may not seem crucial, but they determine everything.
I would then emphasize one point that I really like about this installation. These are the powerful SRA platforms. In fact, there are many products in vibration isolation, and similar platforms are placed here under the Westlakes. I have heard these Westlakes on one brand, and on another, and on a third. I was somewhat skeptical about these, but when I heard the system, specifically the setups on them, I understood why they are here with Anatoly Alexandrovich. Because essentially, this is probably the best that I have heard here from him. This is a really cool brand. They make good platforms.
Tell me, how did you convince Atoya Sancho to put filigrani instead of Bristol? Go ahead, tell me. Debate is happening. A debate is happening. Why? What debate? We are getting to the point. We are trying to complement each other and find some truth. Because in my opinion, Bristol is a professional company. They have an amazing background. As you like, they are in top studios and still perform.
Rodion speaking truth.
Even at Mosfilm, Bristol is present. It's hard for me to criticize for that money. Even if you take the front panel twice as thick, the cover is made much better. The handles are of a completely different quality. The terminals, well, everything is just made at a much higher level. If we take off the cover, I saw what's inside at Filigrani. But this is such good hi-fi. After all, I believe Bristol is high-end. Moreover, I wanted Anatoly Alexandrovich to sell the cube because we listened to how the 7B cube sounds. I brought my 7B cube, brought my preamp, brought my source, and when we turned it on the first floor in that building, I really had a lot of fun. I realized that probably Anatoly Sanish would be completely satisfied, and his, let's say, searches would be over. and then they were in principle over. And then Ivan Ivanovich, again, a respected person whom I also trust, listened to this system and said that it was just, well, mega cool. It was a bomb, really. Westlake played amazingly, but then they were moved here. Bristol also transitioned. Anatoly Alexandrovich bought the 14B Cube from me, set it up here with the BR20 preamp, and overall the system also played very well, decently, everything was cool. But why did you suggest to filigree? Moreover, this is even with us. Uh, mm, Less powerful, but in the slate you need real power. I would even put kilowatt amplifiers here because the 14B Cube, I think, goes up to 600, yes, 600 watts per channel at 8 ohms.
I need to clarify one point. First of all, Anatoly Alexandrovich already had a filigree. One. So I didn't recommend it to him. That's the first. I wasn't even acquainted with him when he already had the 5000 filigree. If viewer doesn't know, this is a St. Petersburg manufacturer, Mikhail Ivanovich, a very talented engineer. No, I have a good attitude towards him. I have been familiar with this brand and Mikhail Ivanovich for a long time because I work in the studio with this equipment.
Do you want a Celegranda too?
Yes. In the context of Kaimada, I have the very first, the simplest one. That is, this is 5000. Which is the highest line that Mikhail Ivanovich makes, the company Filigreen. I also have the 400, which is practically one of the very first they made. So it's an old amplifier, just needs to be dusted off. But it works, a workhorse. When I found myself in this room, before the acoustic design, also important, we listened to this amplifier and the Bryson you recommended then. But I noted for myself when we listened to the audio test, we are not discussing any measurements or these technical things right now. I noted the following for myself when I listened to Bryson. On material where there are acoustic instruments, we are not talking about electronic music right now. I noted that on Bryson there was too much compression for me as a sound engineer. There is an excellent article on the Filigrane website about harmonic distortions that the equipment brings to the recording. It is important to understand that there are still two paths. That we want to hear what is on the recording, or we want to repaint what is on the recording. And on the Filigrane company's website, a lot of attention is given to what an amplifier sometimes brings. This is essentially about users who make comparisons between two amplifiers, and in their comparison, ultimately, the amplifier that plays more sound wins. More does not always mean necessarily better. You need to understand what you are striving for in your particular setup. You want authenticity, as Westlake somewhat hints that this is still authenticity, so to speak. I am not saying that Bristol embellishes anything significantly, understand me correctly, but when we compared it here, it seemed to me that on many acoustic instruments, Filigrane sounds more natural. What is the difference in percentage for people so they understand that there is no spark passing between us here? Guys, this difference is within 5%. This is the comparative characteristic that we are discussing with Rodion. These are very, so to speak, subtle things. Many of you or many other people who are just on the sidelines with audio probably won't even hear this, most likely.
Nikolay, you are the first person to say that Bryston, so to speak, colors more than its, so to speak, other competitors. Bryston is a device that anyone who has encountered it either loves or criticizes. But usually it is criticized for being very, very accurate, very, very honest, surgically accurate, surgically honest. I agree with this because you need to select the acoustics as carefully as possible for it, because if you have Bryston amplifiers and there are any issues with the wires, any problems with the preamp, with the source, with the acoustics, it will pull all of that out and you won't be able to listen to music on it properly. It seems very strange to me to hear that it introduces more harmonic distortion, so to speak, than filigree, because with Bryston, if you buy any Bryston, there is a little notebook, A4, where it says that it was tested by such and such a person, and there are 3 points regarding harmonic distortion, and usually they amount to 0, 0.0, 0, and there are 7, 6, 9, as far as I remember. After the 1, there are definitely 2 zeros. So it's very strange. Well, okay, that's your vision, your hearing, no questions there. But in my opinion, Still with Bristol, despite all my love, friends, I will honestly say, I love Russian equipment, filigree. What they do with amplifiers, they are great. I love Premiere, I love SA Lab. I also love filigree in general and support it in any case. Why? Because it's made in Russia and that's cool. But still, we need to be objective. Premiere cannot compete with Bristol the same. Filigree cannot compete with Bristol. I can't say how much filigree costs, but I think it's quite expensive. Need to look within this budget. If they are great in terms of price-quality ratio, then that's excellent. I recommend it. You should get it. But if all else is equal, again, we are talking about high-end, where there is no difference in price whether the device costs 500 or a million. And I think this question was not raised here. So here, of course, you need to choose a component that will reveal this system as best as possible. In this case, it all comes down to these acoustic systems because Westlake, I repeat, is very heavy acoustics, especially since JBL speakers are installed here. We all know that Westlake comes with 2 speakers, and they have 2 manufacturers for the low-frequency drivers, which are Tata and JBL. TAD is considered, as far as I know, to be more assertive. You can push more on TADs. By the way, what's your opinion? And JBLs are considered, again, to be more, well, in a sense, more refined. Although, again, if the word JBL and sophistication can be applied, they are usually always very robust, like the Everest. By the way, what do you think? Which are the best speakers, TAD or JBL in Westlake?
Have you just listened? Of course, let's talk about it a bit now. Yes, indeed, in Westlake, they always came in 2 versions as far as I know. This is JBL and TAD as a air level. But it should be noted that the JBL 2235H, which are the speakers here, had different baskets installed. And this is not the same 2235H. It is already a level higher. Of course, the TAD 1601 and also the driver that always comes with it, the TD 4001, are, to be honest, probably considered the most desirable components of the most, well, simply incredibly cool systems. Will you really hear the difference between the two? It actually all depends on what your space allows. You always have to remember this when you strive for the very, 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 very top. Because in this very, very, very top, there are other components that also need to be upgraded. You said a cool thing about Bristol's harmonic distortions, that there is always documentation for the equipment that shows how much, what, when, and where. In my practice, I have encountered people who often gave me printouts of the amplitude frequency characteristics from acoustic systems, where it says minus 0.5 plus minus 0.5 dB, the entire amplitude frequency characteristic. I am usually very surprised by such moments in conversation because either the person doesn't understand that this is a measurement made in a laboratory, or they have never seen the actual measurement of their acoustic system. Because if, for example, it is stated in the passport that our amplitude frequency response will fit within plus minus 1.5 decibels, then in reality, if we have plus minus 6 in the room, that is a miracle. Because plus minus 6 is already considered studio level in the world, with a variation between, for example, 40 Hertz and 20 kilohertz. The room is a significantly influencing factor at this moment on pressure, especially noticeable in low frequencies, where the largest peaks are visible because the room modulates these frequencies, and we can sometimes see variations of 25 dB.
I completely agree with you, Nikolay, that regarding acoustics and their frequency response, that's one thing. However, if there is a specific characteristic, the team will change it. But overall, if we have Kef or Bowers speakers, they will retain their family trait. With amplifiers, it's a bit different. Here we specifically get what has been measured. If it has 0.07, in whatever room you connect it, it will output that much if this is a real measurement. And if it has a tube, you can place the tube in any room and you will always distinguish it from a transistor. That's why I find it very strange that this filigree seemed to you to be cleaner. I think that maybe some factors came together. In general, we need to either bring my Bristons here and connect them.
It was very interesting because you have monoblocks on Bowers and Wilkins, and they impressed me a lot. To be honest, I think that monoblocks are probably the most correct test. They are the most valid in terms of comparison. Because here, I previously compared not even monoblock to monoblock, but amplifier to amplifier. After all, when we have a multi-way system, each amplifier of this multi-way system pulls in its own way. And if we compare monoblocks, that is probably the most precise test in this situation.
Yes, that's why at the end, let's say in the mid-90s, this division started when high-end began to emerge, and the concept of high-end appeared in the world. Before, what was considered top? Integrated amplifiers were it. And then people started to extract even more information in various ways. Separating components, that is, the left and right channels separately, the preamp separately, the source separately, everything separately, results in less interference, better sound, less distortion, and theoretically, you should receive more information. For example, why the great Dante Agostina, the founder of Krell, has reached a point with his latest systems where even the power supply in the preamp, if I'm not mistaken, is also separated for the left and right channels. So, not only are the monoblocks separated, but the preamp is also separated. By the way, I also had a Bryston preamp, the BP26, which had a separate power supply. In fact, many companies also make preamps with separate power supplies, but his preamp had the left and right channels separated, and that's cool. In my opinion, this is already the highest point of stereo that we can imagine.
Of course, this fragmentation, the more blocks we have, the more when we talk about being able to even separate the power supply, certainly this system will continue to grow and grow. And for example, an innovation like bi-amping at one time, it was still an innovation, it was somewhat stimulated by concert practice. That is, at concerts, people needed to create line arrays, and you can't use one amplifier for a line array. Then people started using different amplifiers for different frequency ranges, and they realized, wait, the sound is better, the sound is cooler. This practice quickly migrated into high-end audio, and everyone thought, wait, it's better to separate different loads of different speakers onto different amplifiers, then we will have a better soundstage. So yes, bi-amping means twice as many wires, 2 amplifiers, and it's twice as expensive, but it's worth it when you're aiming for a big goal. Just like in your system, I also get a lot of pleasure from your listening.
Thank you, Nikolay. By the way, Magic, strangely enough, it's interesting why such a super expensive cool company doesn't use bi-amping.
Or maybe it's just too expensive for users. Did they conduct any analysis?
Magic, in general, has such budgets. Their rack costs as much as the entire system. Their speakers are top-notch. The M series, I think, costs 100 million rubles, can you imagine?
I can't imagine. To be honest, I can't imagine.
I listened to Magic. The system was practically $1 million. It sounds really cool. And many wrote that people didn't like this sound, but I can say that you have to get used to this sound. It is so pure, so polished, so practically perfect from all points of view, from the lows to the highs, that it's akin to what we talked about with molecular cuisine. Many simply cannot understand this. They want to come get a big steak, pour some sauce on it, baked potatoes, let's say soup, But they get a dish like this, which you can't even fully fill up on. Although I think this approach is more correct. It's already like, well, it's Formula One, If you want to drive track at maximum speed, you can't do it in super comfort.
If we compare it again with Formula One, then in this context, we essentially have a race car. The race car is your system. What the company cube does is indeed acoustic design of the space. It's the track. Any race car needs a track. So when you say people came to the exhibition and didn't like the system, well, any system has context. The context is the space where it was listened to. I would more likely believe that people didn't like the space because due to my studio roots, I have no bias towards any system. That is, on the contrary, I want to get to know the system. And when I listen to a system, I expect that I have the opportunity, based on the context, to hear what the system provides. And when the context is at least palatable, then I understand, damn, I had a great opportunity today. I got to know the system that a person spent several years assembling. A lot of effort, time. It's like experience. Therefore, context. If at exhibitions often, well, I have been to some exhibitions myself, Probably the biggest curse of exhibitions is the absence of context. That is, we want, as users, to get to know a new product, but where...
And there is a regular hotel room. Agree, absolutely. I have always told the guys to set it up, at least put a couple of bass traps, scatter some foam around.
At least, and everything will be different. We are not fans of foam, but at least foam, guys, I mean at least something. Maybe a couple of panels for primary reflection can always be taken along, which are just DIY.
I agree.
This will already give, so to speak, even to the manufacturer.
The power of growth.
Yes, it will allow the manufacturer to showcase their product better.
Yes, of course.
Because after all, these are people who travel to the exhibition and they probably want to show something, convey it to their users, so it's important to remember the context.
I agree. Well, I'll say this, again in defense of those people who didn't like it. My ear is also attuned, and I think that even in a cool venue, they wouldn't have liked it much. They are still not ready for such sound, simply not ready. Well, it's like the JBL Charge speaker. No, people like that. It's just that, well, Magic Attacks with Dan don't allow it.
Well, you mean that there is no disco there that...
There, yes, the bass is so precise, super fast, super right, that people have never heard anything like it in their lives, really never heard.
I understand you. It's probably similar to studio sound when it's too dry, too honest, and at times even probably unpleasant.
Well, something like that in between, but here you still get such hi-fi with even more pressure in the studio. If you're sitting in the near field, it doesn't blow you away, but here it seems like, well, in general, these are the sensations. And we will go to Volcom, where they will let us listen to this super system for a day, if it hasn't been sold yet.
Let me in.
Yes, they will let us in, of course, we are normal guys. So, Nikolay, shall we wrap it up? How much did it cost?
It was about 1 million rubles. About 1 million. This room, yes. Still, here.
No, well, a lot has been done here.
Here, keep in mind that the ceilings are 4 meters high, and any installation is already high installation. Yes, of course. After all, it's high altitude work. So, well, it's not easy to lift and install all this. There was a lot of installation work here, well, in this project, so you need to understand that too. Of course.
When people come to me and buy a projector for 1 million, and then when you say that to hang it up, well, to set it up properly, it costs at least 50,000, they kind of, when it's 100%, are puzzled because, well, the guys, you understand that when you take something for 1 million, you hang it up, you are responsible for it. If you damage any mounting, the lens, God forbid, drop it, I'm not even talking about that, well, you need to invest in the work, these risks. Therefore, you can't just hang some expensive item if it should be done by a specialist. Of course, specialists require money. Well, what specialist would go there for even something trivial to deal with it? So everything needs to be calculated, set up again. That's why I completely agree with you. All of this should cost money. Well, thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, I think we will